Bill, so great to have you on the Slice of Healthcare podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me. I'm always excited to do these kind of talks.
I love it. This is your first time ever being on the show. So would love if you could first tell our audience a little bit about your background. And
Okay.
then also if you could kind of tell us how that led into your current role today.
Okay, perfect. When I graduated school, which is kind of dating me a bit, back in '85, there were actually more jobs than people. And strange enough, I actually wanted to originally be an ad man and work in advertising, and had all sorts of interviews and didn't get placed. But then Wall Street at the time, if people, you may not remember, but it was booming in the early '80s, and um, got an offer to work at a bank. And when I got there, got into healthcare, and then from that, it led to me, being recruited by Johnson and Johnson, which is really where I spent almost 20 years, and learned about how the industry works, which I didn't really know even from the banking days. But then that's where I learned how to do venture capital. J&J was really a fascinating place to work at, because what I thought was interesting about them is, and what they asked our group to do, is they were really forward thinking in the sense, from the standpoint where they asked us to look at healthcare 5 years out and predict where healthcare was going, and then invest in technologies that would help J&J prepare for that future. So I've never done therapeutics. It's all been in digital and technology, and back in the early days, it wasn't even called digital health like it is today. It was just healthcare, tech and healthcare, then HIT. Now we call it digital health, and we'll probably call it something else. But built a wonderful practice there over the year, the time I was there. And then in 2010, much like how I joined J&J, I got a call from Merck out of the blue, and they said, "We love what you're doing at J&J, and would you ever consider coming over to Merck to start their venture activity?" What was interesting about Merck at the time is they didn't even have a therapeutic fund, which shocked me, because most pharmaceutical companies had a therapeutic fund, but they didn't at the time. And I said, "You sure you want to start a digital and tech fund?" And they were like, "Yeah." And it's like anything in life, right place, right time, right offer. And I was able to bring a lot of my team over. And in 2010, in April, I joined Merck to start their venture activity. And that's how I ended up joining them. And today, that fund's a $600 million evergreen fund focused on digital and technology. We're mostly a growth investor. We'll do A and B rounds occasionally, but we don't really do any startup or seed capital. And we really focus on 4 areas. We focus on clinical development and drug discovery. So like in drug discovery, we do things like AI and ML. In drug discovery, we do um, novel platforms. We'll do radiology, pathology, just ways of thinking about how do we make drug discovery more efficient and better than the way we do it today using enabling technology. And then on the clinical development side, it's all around patient identification, patient stratification, recruitment, site selection, all the things that you do in clinical development. A new area that we've been investing in the last 4 years is supply chain. People realize there's a lot of digital health and supply chain. It's all data, and pharma, does lose, some amount of goods to fraud, theft, damage. We shipped it the wrong way. Should have gone by plane. We sent it by boat. So the whole idea is, if you think like an airport, where we're creating like a control tower where we track raw materials coming in and finished goods going out. That's all around data, which is, and again, ultimately digital, but getting the medicine to the right patient, right place, time. That's all in part of the supply chain. On a patient side, we do things around that, but being a pharma-owned VC firm, we do have to be very careful of anti-kickback statutes, so we can't be in the corporate practice of medicine. But we do things like remote monitoring, we do care support, critical decision support tools, uh, care navigation, just things that help the patient get access is the best way to think about it. And then the last bucket is just real world evidence and data, generating the right data for Merck to do the kind of things that they want to do pre-market and post-market, and then analytics and informatics on top of that. And that's kind of the 4 buckets we've spent our time doing it over the past 15. One last thing, over the past 15 years, we've done about 95 investments. We're sitting on about 45 today. And the firm's been really successful, both financially and strategically.
Can you highlight? Thank you so much for that background, Bill. Can you highlight a few? By the way, any of these companies that Bill's mentioning, this does not mean he's mentioning favorites or anything like that. I always feel the need to say that, Bill. But are there any that you can kind of spotlight for us here today? Maybe they are recent, or that particularly really interest you from the start, like when you made these investments?
Sure. So, if we so an example in the discovery and development, a recent investment we did is a company called Npower. And what they do is diversity in clinical trials. One of the things that's happened to our industry is the FDA has mandated that we have to have better diversity in our clinical trial recruiting, and that's what this company specializes in. So it's a really well thought out kind of company that really looks at the community, surrounding the hospitals and where they can better recruit, diverse candidates for clinical trials, which has always been, a struggle for pharmaceutical companies. More on the discovery side, one of the companies that I actually sit on the board of, which I like, is called Unnatural Products, and they're actually engineering drugs using AI in the macrocyclic peptide space. So a real novel way of trying to think about how we can, identify a drug using AI and ML versus, kind of the old-fashioned way that we do it. In the supply chain space, one of the kind of companies we really like is a company called Aerosafe Global. And what they actually do is cold chain as a service. So because we are a vaccine company, making sure that we can get our vaccines delivered to even a rural area in a stable condition. What this company does, it creates boxes that can hold a vaccine at a stable temperature for 14 days. Whether you're in sub-Saharan Africa where it's really hot, or you're in Alaska where it's really cold, it'll stabilize that vaccine. It's just kind of a neat way to deliver, um, uh, vaccines to almost anywhere in the world in a stable environment. On the sort of access to patient. One of the kind of companies we're really got excited about that we've recently done is a company called Cure AI. And it's an AI-driven early cancer detection company, and they're specializing in lung cancer. And one of the issues with lung cancer is the screening. It's really difficult to get screening done. Usually, you have to go into a big MRI machine, and this company does it in a different way, and allowing us then to screen more patients. And the more patients you screen, and obviously if they do end up having lung cancer, we can get them into treatment much earlier. So that's kind of a neat company that we really like. And I think then on more the data side, just give me an example in each. We like a company called Prognos. They're a clinical diagnostic AI company and analytics company, but they look at lab data. They collect all sorts of lab data. They have millions and millions of lab data records, which then help physicians make better choices and patients better choices around their care when they better understand their labs. And so that's kind of a neat little company. But like I said, we have 45 companies in the portfolio. All are really kind of neat sort of companies that we're really proud of. But that's kind of a sampling for you of the ones that are kind of recent that we've done that are really, we think, groundbreaking.
Beyond just capital, can you explain, I guess what additional strategic advantages CVCs offer to startups?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is, the one thing I will say about when you think about a syndicate, I think you have to have both CVC and more institutional private investors. That's what really makes a good syndicate. We both have different things to offer. But if you think about a CVC, we actually offer things that a traditional venture capital firm, doesn't really, offer. We do have extensive technical and research capabilities that a portfolio can tap into. We can help startups meet corporate objectives and navigate the challenges of working with a corporate. It's not always easy for a startup to, even the growth equity companies we invest in are really startups in the end, and working with a pharma and learning how to speak to a pharma, we can help them do that. We can help them with channel and strategic partners. We can help them target early customers. There's a big collaboration. Obviously, one of the big things we want is when we do an investment, we like Merck to sign a commercial agreement and use that technology in a way to help them make their business better than what they're doing. So you have a built-in customer almost. One of the things also we bring is industry expertise. One of the things that at least at Merck is expert in oncology. So if any of these companies are in oncology, you're going to Merck Research Labs, which has been built on pure science. You have that industry knowledge to tap into. We also have extended distribution networks that you can tap into. Because the biggest thing with these companies is scaling, and we can help these companies scale. And then there's unique exit opportunities, right? Corporate's not always the answer, but we do offer potential acquisition opportunities from the parent corporation. So we definitely offer a lot of things beyond capital that the traditional sort of venture capital firm can't provide. But what I've always found though is you need both in the syndicate because we both have different things to offer. Because I will tell you, our fund is both strategic and financial. Being an evergreen fund, we are also required to return our capital back to Merck and keep reinvesting it. But we also, as a corporate, want the strategic value. So we have we're kind of in the mix of both. So we think we're well aligned with the institutional or the traditional partners, because they were motivated by making capital, but so are we. So, but you need that alignment. But I think, corporates offer a unique, value proposition that the others just can't, necessarily give. And really, the real value ultimately is that partnership, that commercial agreement between the corporate parent and the portfolio company. It does two things. It helps the company learn and grow because we're teaching the company how to do things, how to work with our corporate, and then it helps us better our business and do the things that we want to do using these enabling technologies. So it's sort of a nice symbiotic relationship when you can do both those. So the holy grail for us is we can do a financial investment and we have the commercial agreement and then both bring value to not only us, an investor, but to my parent company, which happens to be Merck.
Bill, can you explain to our audience a little bit about why it seems like traditional VCs have pulled back in the current climate, and maybe some of the biggest challenge you see that they're facing today? And really, because so this is kind of a three-parter, but so why they've pulled back, what are some of the biggest challenges they're facing, and then how have CVCs stepped in to fill that gap?
Mhm. So I think it's affecting both CVC and private investors. And so we're not unlike others where we're facing the same challenges, right? We have portfolio companies that need funding, but the market isn't necessarily conducive to that funding. The debt market's dried up a bit. The public markets, IPOs, notwithstanding Omada, which just went out, but it's been a kind of a closed market the past couple of years. What happened in 23 and 24 obviously were after effects of COVID, where valuations went through the roof. And what ended up happening is we had a sort of an industry or course correction, which is always good for the industry, but it does hurt portfolio companies where we kind of realized that we can't afford to build these companies at those valuations. And so what you saw was a retraction and a lot of down rounds. But it also meant that we had to select which companies we were going to fund and not fund. So that's where part of the pullback came from. What was good news though is at the end of 24, we were starting to see, lots of capital come back into the market. Beginning of 25 was really good, but then of course with the geopolitical climate, tariffs, cuts to things like NIH grants, all these kind of things, and kind of brought us back in time. We kind of went back in time, believe it or not, back to sort of the 24, early 24, late 23 kind of area where venture capitalists pulled back. Why we're pulling back is we're reevaluating the market. We're trying to find what really is the best thing to invest in that's the best value for our dollar. Because we can't invest in everything at the moment because we're unsure of the long-term viability of these companies from a funding perspective. Because there's not a lot of alternatives. Like I said, the debt markets got very expensive, um, and there's just reasons to wait and watch. One of the interesting things, though, it does then provide an opportunity. What we see as an investor, and so the private equity firms, is an opportunity to consolidate assets. One of the hardest things to do is scale in the digital health market. But what we see is the ability to bring two good assets together that both need funding, but they are complementary to each other. So it's not bringing two bad assets together; it's bringing two good assets and then building scale where you can. And that's actually what's attracting a lot of capital right now. But what I would say to answer your question further, one of the things that then corporates bring is we bring a large balance sheet. Most corporates are flush with cash, so we have the ability to stay with an asset much longer as well. We're not driven by necessarily the returns. Yes, I'm an evergreen fund, but I'm just a rounding error to Merck and a $65 billion company, right? It does, yeah, they like the money, but that's more for me to be self efficient. They don't rely necessarily on me making returns. So corporates can play the long game. So we can invest and wait out these hard times. So that's another advantage, to your first question earlier. But there's just a natural environment to pull back. We're not, normally we do 8 to 10 investments a year. We're down to 3 to 5 because we're just not sure of the market. And you just got to be very careful because the portfolio can get too big. I like sitting around 30 portfolio companies. We're at 45. That's a big portfolio to manage, right? And we're like everybody else. We're not getting the exits we want. It's slow to exit. So, how many portfolio companies can you manage? And so that's also part of the pullback is just managing your portfolio. It can get too big where it's, just too many companies. And you've got to keep them afloat, and you've got to make tough choices during that time. Are there going to be a point where there are certain companies that, for good or bad, you just don't want to fund anymore. Maybe they're not strategic enough anymore. Maybe they're just not going to make it to where you think they're going to make it. And you got to make a decision then to not fund. But that's sort of the cycle of life in venture capital. And but it's unfortunate because everybody was so excited about the beginning of 25, and then we just kind of hit this sort of roadblock. But I think it's going to, if you're asking me my opinion, I think it's going to clear as the summer moves on. I think we'll start to see some, hopefully that some of the tariff issues get resolved. Funding comes back into the market, and the markets open back up, the public markets. And I'm hoping by the end of 25, we'll be back to where we were, and then 26 will be a good year. You just have to, it's a long game. You have to have confidence. You have to have a lot of patience, and especially in digital health, it doesn't scale overnight like other technologies. It's really a long game.
What advice would you have for the startups that now, a lot of these companies, maybe the exits aren't there that they were hoping for, right? But this doesn't mean that they are not good companies or anything like that. It's just a different market than it was a few years ago. There does come a time for some of these founders that they're building these companies for, in some cases, 10 plus years, right? And they want to go to the next like, what is your advice for those companies? Is it, the end is sooner than you think. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. Would love to hear your thoughts for them. And then also, like, for buyers, like, when are we going to start to see? I keep hearing we're going to see more consolidation, and it seems like that's been slow as well. So yeah, just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the consolidation is going to take place more at the end of the year because again, there's still a pullback right now. So I'm with you. But it's still positive. That's sort of part of the answer. One of the things that these companies have to figure out and have to do much better is just manage cash long term, right? Because it's a longer game. But what I would say to the companies is most of these companies start as what we call point solutions, right? They're a piece of an answer. And point solutions ultimately don't solve, the use case that they're trying to solve. And then they solve a piece of it, which means that there's always a complementary asset that offers something complementary to what your asset offers. So think in terms of an ecosystem, right? You're trying to solve a problem in a broader ecosystem. So if you're struggling to exit or you've been in it a long time, as you said, I would then look for a merger opportunity because you do have a complementary asset out there. You just got to look. Because again, most of these companies don't solve 100% of anything. They solve maybe 50, 60%, maybe even 70%, but there's always a gap. And if you can fill that gap with another asset, that's what then makes it attractive to companies like us that do growth equity or even private equity firms where they want to consolidate in two good assets and then build the scale that you need to build. So that's one of the advices I would give is to think in terms of how would your asset fit another asset? Can you get on a bigger platform? Or you're just looking for a complementary asset to fill the gaps you have. That's kind of the two ways forward. And then just understand that you have to just be very disciplined about managing your long-term cash going forward. Even if you are able to raise a round right now or get debt finance, whatever you're getting, change the way you think about that cash, that you're almost a miser. You're going to spend it really smartly and extend it as long as you can just to make sure that you have a longer life cycle. Because just the funding, the way it was back in 2021 post COVID, is not there.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today, sharing some thoughts with our audience. I look forward to future conversations. Would love to bring you back as a industry correspondent. We'll be doing more just kind of, don't be surprised if I message you and be like, you can say no, but what are you doing tomorrow afternoon for a quick video? But really appreciate having you on the show.
No, thank you so much. I'd love to, Jared. It's been great talking to you, and please invite me back anytime.
I love it. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you.